Here are 3 true camping horror stories. These stories were shared online by people who experienced them firsthand. The first story comes from a man who went camping alone in a national forest. He said he had camped alone many times before and had never experienced anything like this. He arrived in the early evening and set up his tent near a clearing surrounded by trees. There were no other campers nearby. He checked the area before dark and didn't see anyone. After eating dinner, he put out his fire and went into his tent around 10 p.m. The forest was quiet. Sometime after midnight, he woke up suddenly. He wasn't sure why at first. Then he heard footsteps. They were coming from directly behind his tent. At first, he assumed it was an animal, but the steps were slow and evenly spaced, like someone walking carefully. He held his breath and listened. The footsteps stopped. A few seconds later, he shifted slightly inside his sleeping bag. Immediately, the footsteps started again. He froze. They stopped again. He said this happened several times. Each time he moved, the footsteps responded. He realized that whatever was outside knew exactly where he was. He stayed completely still for several minutes. Then he heard a quiet whisper, close enough that it sounded like it came from just inches away. It said his name. He said it clearly did not sound like someone guessing. It sounded familiar. He had not spoken to anyone that night. He had not told anyone where he was camping. He did not answer. After a long pause, the footsteps slowly moved away into the trees. He stayed inside his tent for almost an hour without moving. When the forest stayed silent, he packed his things as quietly as possible and left the campsite in the dark. The next morning, he returned briefly in daylight to retrieve a flashlight he had dropped. That was when he saw multiple footprints surrounding where his tent had been. They were human footprints. The second story was shared by a couple who went camping near a remote lake. They chose the location because it was known to be quiet and rarely crowded. When they arrived, they noticed one other campsite farther down the trail. There was a tent set up, but no one was around. That night, they sat by their campfire until about 11 p.m. They said the area felt peaceful. A few hours later, the woman woke up to the sound of splashing. At first, she thought it was an animal in the water. She listened more closely and realized the splashing was steady and slow. It sounded like someone walking through the shallow part of the lake. She woke her boyfriend. They both listened. The splashing stopped. Then they heard footsteps approaching from the direction of the lake. The steps were wet. The footsteps stopped just outside their tent. They waited for someone to speak. Instead, they heard slow breathing. It sounded like someone standing very close. The man reached for his phone to turn on the flashlight. Before he could, the breathing stopped. The footsteps slowly walked away. They stayed awake until morning. When daylight came, they followed the path of the wet footprints. They led from the lake straight to their tent. Then they turned around and went back into the water. They also noticed that the other campsite they had seen earlier was completely gone. There was no tent, no fire pit, no tracks. They left immediately. The third story comes from 3 friends who went camping together in a wooded area they had visited several times before. They arrived late in the afternoon and set up camp near a trail. They admitted they were drinking and being loud that night. Around 1 a.m., one of them noticed a small light moving between the trees in the distance. They assumed it was another camper with a flashlight. They waved and called out. The light stopped. No one answered. After a few minutes, the light began moving again. This time, it slowly circled their campsite, staying just far enough away that they couldn't see who was holding it. After about 20 minutes, the light disappeared. They eventually went to sleep. Later that night, one of them woke up to the sound of something hitting the side of the tent. At first, it sounded like pebbles. Then something hit harder. They all woke up. From outside the tent, they heard quiet laughing. One of them shouted, telling whoever it was to leave. The laughing stopped instantly. They didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. In the morning, they found several rocks placed carefully in a straight line outside their tent. None of them remembered putting them there. They also noticed fresh carvings on the trees around their campsite. Simple shapes, recently made. They packed up and left. They never returned to that area again. Those were 3 true camping horror stories. Thank you for watching.